Hello and welcome to Life Reviewed. This is episode 6 and part 6 of my Planet of the Apes retrospective. So we finished the original 5 films from the late 60s and early 70s, and now we jump all the way to 2001 to Planet of the Apes, directed by Tim Burton. Now, this movie had a very interesting history, and from the 80s all the way to 2001, they were trying to reboot Planet of the Apes, and it went past through tons of famous directors' hands. To name a few, Oliver Stone, Peter Jackson, James Cameron, Chris Columbus, at different points had involvement with the reboot of Planet of the Apes, and at one point even Arnold Schwarzenegger was attached to star. So after a long sordid history, we ended up with a very big director, Tim Burton. And Tim Burton did not want to remake the original film. He did not want to make a sequel to the original franchise. He wanted to do a total reimagining, going back to Pierre Boulez's original novel and using some of the stuff from the films as inspiration, but not to do a remake. The screenplay was written by William Broyles Jr. It stars Mark Wahlberg as Captain Leo Davidson, Tim Roth as Thade, Helena Bonham Carter as Ari, Michael Clark Duncan as Attar, Paul Giamatti as Limbo, and uncredited is Charlton Heston, returning to the Planet of the Apes franchise as Thade's father. So let's go over the plot. In 2029, aboard the United States Air Force Space Station Oberon, Leo Davidson works closely with primates who are trained for space missions. His favorite simian coworker is a chimpanzee named Pericles. With a deadly electromagnetic storm approaching the station, a small space pod piloted by Pericles is used to probe the storm. Pericles' pod heads into the storm and disappears. Against his commanding officer's orders, Leo takes a second pod and goes in pursuit of Pericles. Entering the storm, Leo loses contact with the Oberon and crashes on a planet called Ashlar in the year 5021. He discovers that the world is ruled by humanoid apes who can speak English, use domesticated horses for transportation, and treat human beings as slaves. Leo comes across a female chimpanzee named Ari, who protests the awful treatment humans receive. Ari decides to buy Leo and a female slave named Deanna to have them work as servants in the house of her father, Senator Sandar. Leo escapes his cage and frees other humans. Limbo, Thade's cowardly and frequently abused advisor, sees them, but Leo persuades him to join up with them, promising him freedom. General Thade and Colonel Attar march ape warriors in pursuit of the humans in a vain attempt to distract the army. Leo discovers Kalima, the forbidden but holy temple of Semos, the first ape who is the ape's god. Kalima turns out to be the remains of the Oberon, which has crashed on the planet's surface and looks ancient. The name Kalima coming from the sign Caution Live Animals, the relevant letters being the only ones not covered in dust. According to the computer logs, the station has been there for thousands of years. Leo deduces that when he arrived, the vortex, he was pushed forward in time, while the Oberon searching after him was not, crashing on the planet long before he did. The Oberon's log reveals that the apes on board, led by Semos, organized a mutiny, took control of the vessel after it crashed. The human and ape survivors of the struggle left the ship, and their descendants are the people Leo has encountered since landing. The apes arrive and attack the humans who have gathered to see Leo. Although he is able to even the odds when he uses the Oberon's last fragments of fuel to fire a final blast at the first wave of apes. A familiar vehicle descends from the sky and is identified immediately by Leo. The pod is piloted by Pericles, the chimp astronaut. Pericles was pushed forward in time as Leo was, and had just now found his way to the planet. When Pericles lands and the pod opens, the apes interpret his arrival as the return of Semos, the first ape, who is their god. They bow, and hostilities between humans and apes suddenly cease. Pericles runs into the wreck of the Oberon, and Leo runs after him, followed by General Thade. Thade and Leo fight. Pericles tries to help Leo, but Thade throws him hard against a wall. Thade takes Leo's gun from him and tries to fire the weapon at Leo. Leo sees that Thade is within the pilot's deck and closes the automatic door, trapping Thade inside. Thade fires the weapon repeatedly at the door, but the ricochets create sparks that cause Thade to huddle afraid under a control panel. Leo decides to escape the planet of the apes and return to Earth. He gives Pericles to Ari, who promises to look after him. He says goodbye and kisses Deanna. Leo climbs aboard Pericles' undamaged pod and travels back in time through the same electromagnetic storm. Leo crashes in Washington, D.C. on Earth. He looks up at what appears to be the Lincoln Memorial, only to find that it's now a monument to General Thade. A swarm of police officers, firefighters, and news reporters descend on Leo, all of whom are apes. So the plot is no better being read than it is watching it. It's a very, very weak story. The screenplay is not much better, and there's a lot of really negative things that have been said by a lot, of people over the years about this film. But there are some really great things about this film too, and we'll get into that. But let's start at the beginning. So all of this human stuff at the beginning with them working on the apes on the Oberon and then flying into the electromagnetic field and stuff is horrible. All of it is absolutely horrible. There's no emotional investment. Wahlberg is not the right person for this film. He's really wooden. He's coming off a few years off the success of Boogie Nights, which he is rock solid in, no pun intended. And he's incredible in that film. And then he goes and he's very, very wooden as an action hero, and especially at the end when he's trying to come on guys, we can fight them. It's it's unbearable. And these opening scenes are just cringeworthy. You just want to see some apes. You want to get to the planet as soon as possible so this can all be over. I wish that they had created a better sort of foundation for the character and why he was, ended up on this planet. Once he gets to the planet, though, things pick up. I guess I'll talk about the best thing about this movie right away. The makeup and prosthetics for the ape faces and bodies may be the best makeup in any film in history. I'm watching this movie 16 years since it came out, and I have never seen a movie that has this quality of make. You probably will never see it again because of CGI, but this level, the facial prosthetics and the makeup and the hair, are incredible. They literally look like apes who have, humanoid apes. It is taking what the original did and taking it times 100 as far as quality. And I do want to applaud that side of it. It is absolutely beautiful. The art direction here for the apes, the costuming, everything is on point. It's if that was in a better film, you would have one of the best Planet of the Apes movies. But and it's almost enough to get you through the whole movie, actually. It's the aesthetic is so pleasing and the apes look so good that you want to keep watching it, even though the human characters are so uninteresting and so dull. And the writing is so bland. The makeup looks incredible. There's some really great stuff with the apes. When the apes are, talking with themselves and the way they interact with each other, I think is all fantastic. I think Paul Giamatti's character is he's full on crazy with his awful teeth and just the way he treats humans and the way Ari treats humans are just so drastically different. You get to see both sides. Tim Roth is terrifying as Thade. He's using this strange, growly voice, and I guess he rewrote some of his lines to make the character more scary, and he is. He's definitely, when he's screeching and jumping around, he's really, really terrifying. Michael Clark Duncan, Thade is really awesome. Tim Roth as Thade is really awesome. I don't know so much about the voice, but Michael Clark Duncan is amazing as Attar. He was all over the posters and promotional material for this movie. He's on the cover. He's everywhere. They made statues of him where they didn't make statues of any other characters. And he's like, they really tried to sell him, and he looks absolutely insane as Attar. The makeup, like this, he looks like an actual ape, which is just amazing. Like that casting was perfect. His voice, he's so great in this movie, and so I think Attar and Thade, their relationship is the best part of this movie. They're kind of like the main bad guys, and I have a soft spot for villains, and I think like maybe he went back and watched General Ursus and was like, oh, this is what I want to be like. I want to be like this like totally badass gorilla. So I really really love him in this. And there's a bunch of supporting cast playing the apes as well, and they're so fun, and all the makeup is such high quality. The sets, the interior sets are beautiful. The exterior design of the ape city is like really unique looking and very different than what we've seen before. And then once it starts to get into this whole like chasing the humans thing, it goes into more bland sets of desert and woods and stuff. You lose a little of that. And this is where the film just becomes a lot less interesting. There's this really bizarre scene where, Mark Wahlberg's character, Leo, decides he's going to lead the apes, like, stealthily at night through the, guerrilla encampment, the military encampment, to cross the river because apes are afraid of water. And for whatever reason, he like screams and starts catching things on fire and basically alerts the entire camp to the fact that what they're doing. Versus, all the apes are, a lot of them are going to sleep. They could have stolen the horses and just kind of like snuck through, but for whatever reason, they decide to just alert like the entire encampment with Attar and everybody, and he runs around burning their tents, which that doesn't seem like it's doing like it's worth the time when you could have just ridden straight through. Why would you burn all their tents? I mean, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But then they have that scene where the apes have to cross the water and she's drowning, and like Thade is mad later when Attar's like, yeah, they went in the water, and it's like, well, you just saw them cross the water. Like, there's no reason you couldn't have, like, you're like the most badass commander, of Thade's army. Like, you should be able to get some people to cross the river and catch them. They're right there. But yeah, it's a really like stupid scene. It just like anybody thinking about it would be like, they could have done something better than this. The ending is a little bit better when Thade's army finally shows up. It looks awesome. I mean, this like I keep going back to the costumes, but the costumes look so killer when they're all on their horses, and it looks like an actual army of apes. And I don't hate Leo's idea to use the remaining fuel to like create that explosion. And it actually works really well. So they send in the first wave is all the chimpanzees running on all fours, which just looks awesome. And when they get to the ship, Leo like hits the ignition and it blows all of them back, like killing and burning a bunch of them. But it like blasts them all in the air and they go flying. And Attar is like, we can't fight that. They don't know that's the last one, but then Thade just says like charge, and they just charge right in. And this combat's actually really good. This is how I wish battle for the Planet of the Apes had ended. There's a lot of hand-to-hand combat. There's a lot of like big hits and like MMA style fighting and sword fighting. It's just really, really awesome. And this is like the highlight of the whole thing. And then it gets stupid again because Pericles lands. All the apes start worshiping him because they think he's like Semos come back, like the Messiah. And then he runs off, and then Thade is like, I don't really care if he's the Messiah or not. I'm going to go smack him around. And Thade like hurts him, and he like breaks his leg or something, and he crawls off. And he gets, Leo shuts the door on him, and he goes crazy, shooting the gun at himself with the, it's going back at him, and he's whimpering underneath the thing. It's just a really, like, I mean, it's so anticlimactic. Thade's trapped in the thing. Attar decides he wants to be friends with humans, and then he goes about kissing the ape, Ari. Then he's kissing Deanna, who we haven't even talked about. And the reason we haven't talked about her is because the human characters are absolutely atrocious in this film. The human characters who aren't, they don't speak in the original, but they speak in this one. They don't, you can't remember any of their names. They barely talk. They add nothing to the story whatsoever but to follow him around. They kind of mope about, there's the younger brother who basically almost ruins the whole plan by trying to be at the head of the battle when he's been asked, repeatedly by Leo to be in the back with the other humans. And they're just a bunch of, really stupid characters. So they're super forgettable. The quote-unquote romance is basically non-existent. And there's none of that, affection that Taylor and Nova had in the original film. That's, there's the subtext. There's nothing. It's terrible. She's obviously a little jealous that, the ape, Ari, they're both jealous of each other, of who he really likes. But he's like, I don't like either of you. I just don't want to be here. And so he kind of gives them each a quick kiss. She's like, maybe you'll return someday. He says absolutely nothing to her because he's like, no, and I don't want to make a sequel to this movie. Gets in Pericles' ship, flies back, and then we have the big reveal. So before that, what's interesting about this movie that's very different than the other Planet of the Apes is that this is an actual other planet. This is not Earth in the future. This is another planet that's ruled by apes. How is it ruled by apes? It's because when the Oberon crashed, the humans from the Oberon populated this planet and started reproducing. The apes, one of them who was smart and they were doing, tests or whatever with them, Simos, took over and led the apes to kill the humans and, enslave them or whatever and took over the planet. So it basically was a uninhabited planet that, humans and apes landed on, and then they populated it from there. At least that's as much as we get from the movie. Whether or not there were any humans or apes there before, I don't think it really says. I think they're all descendants of the Oberon people. And so it is very different that this is a planet of the apes that's a totally different planet. It's not Earth. So he makes it back to Earth, and somehow the Abraham Lincoln statue is now a memorial to Thade. And all of the people, and this is modern day with cell phones and cameras and everything, this is modern day. All of the police and firefighters, reporters, everybody, microphones or everything they're all apes. They're all, they drive up in cars and they get out and everybody's apes. So we're left with whatever happened in time or history or whatever, that the planet Earth has now been converted to another planet of the apes. And somehow Thade is there, they're building monuments of Thade. And so there's almost no explanation for how this could even occur. I'm not sure what, other than setting up a sequel, what they could even, what that could even mean. How does Earth know about Thade if Thade was an ape from an ancestor of some chimps that landed on a planet? I don't know. I don't really understand why they ended it like this, other than to try to give you that same shock and awe of the original film. And I was, 12 years old or 13 years old when I saw this movie in theaters, and I remember being like, look how cool this is. But it's, it kind of falls flat, especially when you put some thought behind it. That being said, I think if they had made a sequel to this film, having it in modern day with the ape, a modern day ape-run civilization, which has never actually been shown in any of the movies. So you have the apes coming back and escape to a modern day, human civilization, at least modern for the time. Conquest, they're slaves and they're not in charge. And then battle, by the time battles happen, the nuclear wars happened and everybody's, the land is ravaged. But we've never seen apes driving around in cars. as taxi drivers and walking around the city and going to business meetings. And I think that would have been a pretty good sequel. And it would have been interesting to see how they were going to say time got altered and everything happened there. I think that certainly would have been interesting. For some reason, they opted not to make a sequel to this film. It made a ton of money. There was really no reason not to make one. I think that maybe the people who made this one did not want any involvement in it. And I don't know what the contracts look like. But yeah, they opted not to make a sequel, which is really astonishing based on this being such a massive movie in 2001. Other things we didn't mention, some of the callbacks to the original franchise. So Attar early in the film says, take your stinking hand off me, you damn dirty human, which is, I think, again, when I first saw it, I chuckled at it, but now it's just kind of like, ugh. And then Charlton Heston reappearing as Thade's father as an actual ape this time is great. He's incredibly old, but his voice is still powerful, and it's a great moment to have him there, and I think that is a really good choice. And then he does his famous line from the end, damn them all to hell, which is a nice callback. It's much more natural than the Attar line from earlier in the film. So that's Planet of the Apes 2001. My score is 5 out of 10. I think it does a lot of things right, but it does a lot of things wrong. It may have the best makeup of any film in history. It's absolutely beautiful to look at these characters. They look incredible, and they don't shy away from extreme close-ups where you can see every bit of detail. And the amount of makeup and sitting in a chair that these actors must have gone through is incredible. So technically, it's an achievement. But story-wise and screenplay-wise, it definitely misses the mark. And there is no continuation of this. There are some spin-off novels that use this universe and some comics, but aside from that, this is an alternate universe from the original 5 movies. It doesn't tie in any way to the original franchise or the future franchise, so this is just an interesting experiment in the middle of Planet of the Apes until they choose to reboot it about 10 years later. So thank you for listening to Life Reviewed. Next up, we're starting the new trilogy with Rise of the Planet of the Apes. So look forward to that. And please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.